This woman raised my son into the man he is today.
The graduation hall erupted in applause as Malik stepped to the microphone. Smiling, he pointed toward the woman sitting beside him. "This woman raised my son into the man he is today," he said, wrapping an arm around his mistress. Every eye turned to his wife, Zuri, the woman who had sacrificed 18 years for that boy. Everyone waited for her to break. Instead, she quietly reached into her purse, placed a sealed envelope on the podium, and smiled. Malik's smile disappeared the instant he saw the name printed on the front. The hall belonged to Ashford Preparatory Academy, and 200 families filled the seats beneath a ceiling of soft gold light. Malik Carter looked the part of the proud father, charcoal suit, easy smile, the watch that caught the light whenever he moved his hand. The woman he had pointed to was Simone Devereaux in ivory, her chin lifted like someone who had waited a long time to be seen in a room like this. And the wife in the front row, Zuri Adeyemi Carter, had until 3 seconds earlier been exactly what every phone in the room was hoping to film, a woman about to fall apart in public. She did not fall apart. She rose from her seat, crossed to the stage without hurry, and set that single cream envelope in front of him. Then the whole room seemed to hold its breath at once. 200 people gone still, the graduate himself frozen in his chair behind them with a look no one could yet read. Malik's hand hovered over the envelope and would not close on it. How a marriage arrives at a moment like this, how a quiet woman comes to own a room this completely, begins long before the applause, on the night a boy was born and his father chose to be somewhere else. Before we begin, please take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps this channel grow. Now, let's begin. For 20 years, Malik Carter had been the man Atlanta wanted to believe in. The magazines called him self-made. There he was on the cover of Meridian Quarterly, 44 floors up, the whole city glittering behind him like something he had personally switched on. He gave the interviews that men like him give, about grit, about betting on yourself, about arriving in a city with nothing but a plan. His name was carved in the lobby stone of the tower his company built. At every ribbon cutting, he shook the mayor's hand and thanked no one. Thanking someone would have meant admitting the empire had a second author. It did, but she was always standing just off to the side, and the world had been trained not to look at her. Here is the part Malik never said out loud. The money had never been his. Zuri's father, Kunle Adeyemi, had built a fortune moving freight through the port of Savannah, and when he died, he left it all to his only daughter. Every building Malik put his name on had been bought with her family's money, held quietly in her family's name. Malik had married into a life and then spent 20 years convincing the world and himself that he had earned it. Zuri let him. She had a mind for numbers, a partnership at a firm that banks hired to find money other people had hidden, and a rule her father had left her: never sign what you haven't read twice, and never let a man tell you what you own. She read everything. She simply never announced it. And what the magazine covers never showed was who raised the boy. Malik traveled. He had always traveled, even the night Amari was born, when a closing in Charlotte kept him 3 states away from the delivery room. So it was Zuri who sat up with fevers at 3 in the morning, Zuri at the parent conferences, Zuri in the bleachers at every rain-soaked lacrosse match with a thermos and a spare rain jacket. She raised that child one ordinary day at a time, with no cameras and no applause. Amari knew it. Children always know who actually shows up, which is why years later, when a man stood on a stage and gave the credit to someone else, the only person who understood the true size of that lie would be the boy himself. The neglect was never loud. It was a pattern of small absences that added up to a childhood. When Amari made varsity captain in his sophomore year, he saved the news for the dinner his father had promised to be home for. Malik texted at 6:40, "Tied up, celebrate without me," and Zuri watched her son read it, nod once, and quietly put his phone face down beside his plate. She took him for burgers instead. They laughed until it almost didn't hurt. Almost. Later, she learned that the meeting that night was a corner table at Bacchanalia, 2 glasses of wine, and a woman in ivory laughing at something Malik said. At home, Malik had grown careless with the one thing he should have guarded, his own wife's patience. He spoke over her at dinners. He waved off her questions about the accounts as though numbers were a hobby she should have outgrown. Once, over a nightcap he did not offer to share, he told a table of his friends the story of how he had built Carter Meridian from nothing, brick by brick. And when Zuri gently noted that the first loan had come from her father, he laughed and said, "Behind every great man, right?" And the table laughed with him. She smiled for the guests. Something in her went very still and very cold, and it did not warm up again. The first real crack was almost too small to see. A charge on the household account, a jeweler on the West Side, $4,000 on a Tuesday she had spent in a deposition 2 states away. There had been no gift, there had been no occasion. Zuri looked at that line for a long moment, the way she looked at any number that did not belong in its row, and then she did the only thing that had ever served her. She remembered it, and she waited. The signs came after that in no hurry, one at a time. Malik started going to the gym at an age when most men stopped pretending. He turned his phone face down at dinner, a new habit he performed without noticing he performed it. He worked late at the site on nights the site had no crew. He wore a cologne she hadn't bought him. None of it, on its own, would have convinced a court. All of it together convinced her. One evening she stood in her own kitchen and watched her husband smile at a screen he angled away from her, and the last of her doubt walked quietly out of the room. She did not cry. She thought one clear sentence, "Something is wrong," and then a second one she would keep to herself for a long time. "And I will be the one who decides how this ends." She did not hire anyone. She did not follow him. She simply looked calmly at the life they already shared, the accounts, the calendar, the little lies that stop matching up once you stop wanting to believe them. It did not take long. Money he called consulting fees flowed to a company that turned out to be a woman with a nice apartment and no clients. A standing Thursday reservation for 2. A necklace bought the same week he'd told Zuri money was tight. He had grown so sure no one was watching that he stopped bothering to hide. He never imagined that the wife he dismissed at dinner parties read financial statements for a living. The woman's name was Simone Devereaux, and she was not, in her own mind, a villain. She was 34 and had spent her whole life a half step outside the life she believed she was owed, watching it through restaurant windows. Now, at last, she was inside, and she had convinced herself she had earned it by being braver about love than other women. Malik had told her the marriage was already dead, a cold wife, a loveless house, a woman who cared only about her spreadsheets and her father's money. Simone believed every word because believing it cost her nothing and gave her everything. She had never met Zuri. She had built an entire future on a woman described to her only by the man who had every reason to lie. It was while looking for an old account number that Zuri found the photograph. It had slipped behind a folder in the bottom drawer of the office, forgotten for 18 years. A hospital room, a younger, exhausted version of herself in a paper gown, holding a newborn wrapped in a striped blanket. Amari, 4 hours. No one else in the frame, no one else in the room. Malik had been in Charlotte. A nurse had taken the picture out of pity, and Zuri had never framed it because framing it meant admitting how alone she had been at the very start. She sat down on the office floor and held it in both hands for a long time. Everything else she had gathered was proof. This was the wound. She slid the photograph into the front port of the leather portfolio that went everywhere with her, and she understood it was the truest thing she owned. The rest of the picture came together in plain terms. Malik had been spending money on another woman, money that had never actually belonged to him. The company, the house, the school, the cars, all of it sat on paper in a trust her father had left her 20 years ago. Malik had signed those papers once, without reading them, back when he was young and grateful and in a hurry. He believed he owned an empire. What he really owned was permission, and permission can be withdrawn. Zuri did not feel triumphant when she understood this. She felt tired, and then, slowly, she felt clear. What steadied her in those weeks was her son. On the nights the house was too quiet, she and Amari cooked. It had been their ritual since he was small enough to stand on a chair to reach the stove. One evening, stirring a pot he did not need to stir, 17-year-old Amari said without looking up, "You don't have to pretend around me, Mom. I see him. I've always seen him." She started to answer and found she couldn't. He kept going, quieter. "When I turn 18, I want to talk to you about my name. Carter never felt like mine. I've always thought of myself as Grandpa Kunle's grandson." Then he kissed the top of her head and went to bed, and left his mother standing very still in the kitchen, holding a name she had not expected to become the center of everything. The distance between father and son had grown its own quiet weather. Malik, when he was home, filled the house with talk about himself and left no room for the boy. On Amari's 18th birthday morning, the morning of the trust, though the boy didn't know that yet, Malik breezed through the kitchen, pressed a folded check into his son's hand without looking up from his phone, and said, "Buy yourself something. Big day. We'll do the real celebration after the ceremony." Then he was gone. Amari looked at the check, then at his mother, and set it on the counter unopened. "He doesn't even know what today is," he said. He wasn't angry. He had passed anger a long time ago. He was just done. By the end of that summer, Zuri knew everything there was to know. She had, if she was honest, known most of it for 3 years, longer than she had let even herself admit. So the only thing left to decide was not whether and not what, but when and where and in front of whom. She poured a glass of the wine her father had loved, untouched since his funeral, and she raised it, alone, to the dark window. Amari's graduation was 11 months away. She had her day. Malik made the day easy for her because Malik could not resist a stage. Months before the ceremony, he wrote Ashford Academy a check large enough to fund a new wing, and he did it for one reason. He wanted the microphone. He wanted to be the parent invited to say a few words at graduation, the successful father blessing his successful son in front of everyone who mattered in Buckhead. He arranged it like he arranged everything, with money and confidence, and he told Zuri about it over dinner as though announcing good weather. "They're letting me speak," he said, cutting his steak. "It's fitting. I built all this. Somebody should stand up and say so." That was Malik now, in the last stretch before the fall, a man so certain of himself he had stopped watching his own footing. He believed the house was his, and the money was his, and the son was his achievement, and he believed his wife would never do anything about any of it. "Zuri's not going anywhere," he told Simone one night, laughing, sure of it. "She's too proud to make a scene. She'd never air this in public. She has too much to lose." He had it exactly backwards, and he could not have known, because for 20 years he had mistaken her silence for weakness. It had never been weakness. It had been aim. Zuri prepared the way she prepared for everything, quietly and with one person she trusted completely. Grace O'Coffer had been her closest friend since law school and was now her attorney. They met at Grace's kitchen table, not an office. The moment Amari signs on his birthday, the trust becomes final. Malik is out, not weakened, out, and the money he moved to that woman becomes something you're legally required to hand to the company's board. She looked up. There's no taking it back once we start. Zuri turned a page, read it twice out of old habit, and signed. I'm not looking to take anything back, she said. I'm looking to tell the truth once, completely, and then be free.
At home, the calm held perfectly because Malik had no idea he was inside a countdown. Over dinner one night, he floated the idea he'd clearly been building up to. He wanted to bring a family friend to the graduation, someone who's been a real support to Amari. He didn't quite meet her eyes. Zuri understood at once that he meant Simone, that he actually intended to seat his mistress among the families, as if the two halves of his life could share a row. She set down her fork, looked at him for a moment, and said warmly, of course, she should absolutely be there. Malik's shoulders dropped in relief. He thought he had gotten away with it. He had, in fact, just handed her the last piece she needed. The night before the ceremony, Zuri put the envelope together. Onto the cream paper she laid the trust document signed by Amari that very morning, the ink only hours dry. She added a single plain page listing the money Malik had moved to another woman, no jargon, just dates and amounts anyone could read. And on top of it all, she placed the photograph, a young mother, alone, holding a 4-hour-old boy in a room where his father had chosen not to be. She sealed the flap. Then she took her father's pen and wrote across the front the name her son had chosen. She set it by her keys and turned off the light. And then, for the only time in this whole story, Zuri Adeyemi came apart. Alone in the dark, with no one to perform for, she pressed her hands to her face and wept, not for Malik, who had long ago become unable to hurt her, but for the 18 years, for the girl in the paper gown, for every game she had cheered at alone. She let it come, and she let it finish. Then she washed her face, drank a glass of water, and put herself back together the way she'd taught herself to do at 3 a.m. over a sick child 2 decades before. By dawn, her face held nothing but calm. The crack was real. No one would ever see it. That was the whole point. Graduation morning came clear and gold. Amari found her in the kitchen before the house was awake, already in his gown, the tassel loose over one shoulder. For a second he was 4 hours old again, and then he was a man. You didn't have to do all this, he said, and they both knew he wasn't talking about the coffee. Zuri reached up and straightened his tassel, the way she had fixed 10,000 small things over 18 years. I did, though, she said. I did it the first night. I'm not going to stop now. He held her a beat longer than a boy holds his mother. Then, lo, whatever happens up there today, I already know who raised me. She had promised herself she would not cry twice. She kept the promise by a hair. They arrived separately, which surprised no one. Malik came in the Bentley with Simone beside him in ivory, and he walked her into the hall with a hand at the small of her back, the same gesture he had once used on Zuri in another life. Zuri watched from across the lot and felt nothing move in her chest. Whatever warmth she had once carried for him had cooled long ago into something patient and clear. She checked the clutch under her arm. She looked at the man laughing his way towards the worst mistake of his life and allowed herself one quiet thought as she followed him inside. He has one move left, and he still thinks it's his.
The ceremony ran its gilded course. When the diplomas were done, the headmaster stepped forward and, exactly as arranged, invited a parent who has been so generous to this community to say a few words. Malik rose to his own applause, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the microphone like a man walking towards a mirror. He thanked the school, he thanked the faculty, and then, smiling, he pointed to the woman in the second row and said the sentence he had somehow convinced himself he was allowed to say. "This woman raised my son into the man he is today." He put his arm around Simone Devereaux. The room applauded, uncertain but obedient, and every phone turned to the front row, towards the wife, hungry for her to fall apart. Zuri did not fall apart. She set down her program, stood, and walked to the stage in a silence that grew heavier with every step. The applause faltered and died as she climbed the shallow stairs and came to stand beside her husband, close enough that the microphone caught them both. She did not snatch it from him. She did not raise her voice. She looked out at the room and said, in a tone as level as still water, "Thank you, Malik. Since we're being honest today, let me help." Somewhere in the middle rows, a woman gasped. Malik's smile held, but only because he had not yet understood it was already over. "Let me clear something up," Zuri said, unhurried, "because my husband has been very generous with credit that isn't his to give." She let the quiet stretch. "I've known about Simone for 3 years." The words landed flat and clear, and the effect wasn't a gasp so much as a change in the air. 200 people realizing at the same moment that they were no longer watching a graduation. Malik's arm came off Simone's shoulder as if it had touched a hot stove. In the second row, Simone's lifted chin dropped an inch. Zuri didn't look at her yet. "That's the small truth," she went on, turning so the whole room could see her face. "Here's the bigger one." She held up a single folded page. "Everything my husband just took credit for, the company, this school, the house outside, none of it was ever his. 20 years ago, my father left me everything. Every building with Malik's name on it was bought with my family's money, held in my name." Her voice didn't rise, it sharpened. "For 20 years, he spent that money like a man who earned it, and some of it, this past while, he spent on her." She looked at the page, then at the room. "It's all written down. My attorney has it. As of this morning, so does the company's board." Malik's mouth opened. Nothing came out. His hands had begun to shake. It was Simone who broke first, and she broke exactly the way Zuri had known she would. She came to her feet, ivory trembling. "Malik, tell her that's not true." She stopped because she had turned to him for help and found instead a man watching his own funeral. "You told me it was yours," she said, and her voice cracked down the middle. "The apartment, the trips, all of it. You told me I was giving me a life." The realization arrived in her face in real time that the security she had traded everything for had never existed, that she had loved a man who owned nothing, that she was not the villain in this story, but another woman who had been lied to in it. "You told me I raised him," she whispered, horrified now. "I met him 3 years ago. Why would you make me say that?" She pressed her hand to her mouth. The room heard every word. "He said a great many things," Zuri answered, and for the first time her voice held something almost gentle, because Simone, in the end, had been fooled by the same man. "He told you I was cold. He told you this marriage was dead. He handed you a script and let you believe it was love." She let that sit. "You weren't the villain here. You were just the last person to find out." Then she turned, away from both of them, toward the third row, where a young man in a graduation gown had quietly risen to his feet. "But none of this is why I came up here," Zuri said. "I came up here for him." She took the cream envelope from her clutch and held it out, not to Malik, who lunged half a step and reached for it on instinct, but past him, toward her son. "This isn't yours," she said to Malik without heat, and Malik froze with his hand in the air. On the front of the envelope, in her father's ink, was a name. Malik read it, and the room watched his face come down like a building. It did not say Malik Carter. It did not say Zuri. It said Amari Adeyemi. That morning, on his 18th birthday, the boy had taken his grandfather's name and signed his father out of everything. Inside were the papers that made it final, and beneath them, when Amari slid them out with steady hands, the photograph. A young mother, alone, holding a newborn in a hospital room. True in a way no speech could argue with. Amari looked at the picture for a long moment. Then he looked at the man who had just thanked a stranger for raising him, and he did the quietest, hardest thing a son can do. He said nothing at all. He simply stepped down, crossed the front of the stage, and stood beside his mother, shoulder to shoulder, the way you stand next to the person who actually stayed. Malik made a sound, low and involuntary, and grabbed the podium to stay upright. The fine suit suddenly looked like a costume on a smaller man, and Malik Carter stood alone on a stage he had built with borrowed money in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress, watching his wife and his son fail completely to need him. Zuri leaned to the microphone one last time. The room was so quiet she barely had to breathe the words. She looked at her husband, not with hatred, which would have given him something to hold on to, but with the calm of a woman finally setting something down, and she said softly, "He was never yours to give away." Then she took her son's arm, and they walked off the stage together, and the doors at the back of the hall opened onto an ordinary afternoon. The fall came quickly, and it came in order. Presented with the trust and the record of the money he'd moved, the company's board removed Malik as chief executive in a closed meeting that lasted less than an hour. The magazine that once called him the man who rebuilt the skyline ran 2 cold paragraphs about an ousted founder and an ongoing review. His name was quietly sanded off the lobby stone the next time the building changed hands. In a city where a handshake is worth more than a contract, no one would take his calls. He had spent 20 years being thanked for a life another woman paid for, and the whole bill came due at once. He ended up in a leased condo across town, calling a son who no longer picked up, telling anyone who'd still drink with him that it had all been done to him. Simone's ending was not a disappearance. Weeks after the graduation, she asked Malik to meet her, and in a half-empty coffee shop, she finally said the thing out loud. "You didn't just cheat on her," she told him, her voice shaking. "You used me to hurt her, and you made me the weapon. You had me stand in that room and take credit for a child I never raised." She was crying now, but it was a clean kind of crying, the kind that comes when a lie finally lets go of you. "I gave up things for you, real things, and you never had anything to give me. Not the money, not the truth, not even a version of yourself that was real." She pushed her chair back. "I was another woman you lied to. The difference is, I'm the one who's going to live the rest of my life knowing what I let you turn me into." Then she left, not chased out, not ruined into silence, but walking out on her own, carrying a hard, clear knowledge she would spend years making peace with. She rebuilt slowly in another city, smaller and honest. She never took a shortcut like that again. Zuri did not move on because the phrase was far too small for what she did. She stepped fully into the life that had always, quietly, been hers. She took the chairman's seat of the reorganized company, and her first act was to fund the thing Malik had once canceled to buy a necklace, a foundation in her father's name, paying for children at schools like Ashford whose mothers were doing it all alone. People who had spent years being told she was lucky began at last to understand what they had actually been looking at. Amari finished his first year at Morehouse with his grandfather's name on the honor roll, and he called his mother every Sunday, and he meant it. On a cool spring morning, Zuri stood alone on the terrace of the house that was finally hers, a cup of coffee warm in her hands. Inside, on the mantel where a wedding portrait used to hang, there was now a single framed photograph, a young woman in a paper gown holding a 4-hour-old boy, alone and unafraid. She looked at it every morning. She was not thinking about Malik. She hadn't thought about Malik in a while. She watched the sun come up over a city her family had helped build, and she felt something she had waited 18 years to feel. Not triumph, not even relief, but peace. The deep, unhurried peace of a woman who had stayed quiet until the exact right moment, told the truth once, and been believed. She finished her coffee. The house was still. It was hers, and so was every quiet morning that would come after it. If you enjoyed this story, don't just watch and leave. Like this video, share it with friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel for more powerful and interesting stories. Bye. See you in the next one.